This isn't just stone. It's an indictment, a challenge hurled in the face of our so-called modern civilization, with its cranes, lasers, and computers. In a quiet valley of Lebanon, on a foundation that makes NASA engineers shake their heads in disbelief, stand the remains of a Roman temple. At least, that's what we thought it was. Because beneath those Roman columns lies something far older, far more impossible. The ruins of Baalbek, or Heliopolis as the Romans later called it, are home to the largest stone blocks ever quarried and lifted by human hands. Yet even that description feels wrong, because what stands here shouldn't exist at all. Before the Romans built their temple to Jupiter, someone else laid its foundation, a base so massive, so precisely cut, that it seems to mock every law of physics we know. At the heart of this mystery are three enormous blocks known as the trilithon. Each weighs close to 900 tons, the equivalent of 3 fully loaded Boeing 747s. But these giants aren't just lying on the ground. They're raised 7 meters above it, perfectly aligned, fitted together so precisely that not even a knife blade can slip between them. And here's the most unsettling part. These are not the biggest stones. Just outside the temple, in the nearby quarry, lies another colossal monolith, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. It weighs about 1,000 tons, and beneath it, archaeologists found an even larger block, discovered in 2014, estimated at 1,650 tons. For comparison, the largest modern cranes can barely lift 1/5 of that weight. And yet, thousands of years ago, someone not only carved these blocks but somehow moved them from the quarry to the temple site, over uneven terrain, and raised them into place. The Romans, obsessed with recording their feats of engineering, never wrote a single line about how they did it. No drawings, no inscriptions, nothing, just silence. And that silence is deafening. It leads to one haunting question. If the Romans didn't build it, then who did? What forgotten civilization possessed technology so far beyond its time, and then vanished without leaving a trace, except for these impossible stones? This isn't just archaeology. It's a crime scene. And the evidence is carved in stone. To understand Baalbek's mystery, we need to think like investigators, not historians. We must analyze the evidence, the stone itself, its weight, its shape, and its position. Let's start with the basics. A standard construction block today weighs about 20 kilograms. The average block in the Great Pyramid of Giza weighs 2.5 tons, about the size of a modern SUV. That was already an astonishing achievement. The heaviest block in the Great Pyramid, the granite beam above the King's Chamber, weighs around 80 tons. That was the absolute limit of ancient Egyptian engineering. Now return to Baalbek. Each trilithon stone weighs 10 times as much as the heaviest block in the Great Pyramid. And they're not lying flat on the ground. They form part of a retaining wall, lifted 7 meters high and perfectly aligned. Imagine the steps required. First, quarry a single stone the size of a train car, weighing nearly 1,000 tons. Then transport it almost 1 kilometer across rugged terrain. Finally, raise it the height of a 2-story building, and fit it with millimeter precision beside 2 others of the same size. And all of this, without steel, hydraulics, or engines. Let's break down each impossibility one by one. Step 1. The quarry. It still lies open today, dotted with massive unfinished blocks, as if the workers vanished in the middle of their shift. The most famous, the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, rests partially detached from the bedrock, its underside still connected to the earth, one corner slightly lifted, as though the work stopped suddenly. Nearby lies the Stone of the South, weighing over 1,200 tons, and the third, even larger monolith discovered in 2014, roughly 1,650 tons. These abandoned giants tell us 2 things. First, the builders were not limited by necessity. They chose to carve the largest blocks possible, a deliberate show of power and skill. Second, even they failed sometimes. Cracks may have formed during carving, forcing them to abandon the work. But that still doesn't explain how they did it. Step 2. Transportation. How do you move a block weighing 1,000 tons across uneven terrain for almost a kilometer? Modern engineers have tried to simulate it, and the results are terrifying. The most popular theory is the use of wooden rollers and human strength. But under such weight, wooden rollers would be crushed instantly. The pressure per square centimeter would splinter even the hardest oak. And the path from the quarry to the temple site is not flat. It rises. You'd have to not only drag the stone but lift it uphill. Some have suggested that the builders used stone causeways and bronze spheres as bearings, rolling the monoliths along. But no trace of such a system has ever been found. Step 3. Lifting. Even if you somehow managed to move a 900-ton block to the construction site, how would you raise it 7 meters high? Roman cranes, though ingenious, had strict limits. The most powerful known Roman crane, the polyspastos, could lift around 6 to 10 tons. Maybe 12 with multiple cranes working together. To lift 1 trilithon stone, you'd need 90 synchronized cranes, working in perfect harmony, lifting evenly, or the stone would crack instantly under its own weight. Even by today's standards, such coordination would be nearly impossible. Another theory proposes massive earthen ramps. But to build a ramp with a gentle enough incline to raise a 1,000-ton block 7 meters would require moving more earth than was needed for the entire temple itself. And yet, there are no traces of such ramps anywhere around Baalbek. Then comes the precision. Each trilithon block fits so perfectly that the gap between them is less than a millimeter. This isn't rough stacking, it's surgical alignment. Whoever did this had more than brute strength. They had instruments capable of measuring with astonishing accuracy. And that's what makes Baalbek an anomaly. Not just difficult, but deliberately impossible. A monument that defies the technological limits we assign to the ancient world. A place where the evidence points not to the Romans, but to someone else entirely. The Romans were master builders, yes, but even for them, this project would have been equivalent to sending men to the moon. So if not them, then who? The official story, repeated in textbooks and tourist brochures, says the answer is simple. Baalbek was the pinnacle of Roman engineering. They built the grandest temple complex in their empire here, dedicated to their chief gods, Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury. Construction began under Emperor Augustus in the 1st century before Christ and continued for over 200 years. The massive stones, the story goes, formed the foundation for the Temple of Jupiter. A neat, elegant theory, until you start looking closer. Because when you do, the cracks appear, not in the stones, but in the story itself. The official story of Baalbek begins to crumble the moment you compare the temple's architecture to the foundation beneath it. The Roman structures, the towering Corinthian columns and grand stairways, are unmistakably Roman. Their style, proportion, and craftsmanship fit perfectly with what we know of imperial architecture. But the base they stand on doesn't belong to that world. The Romans built with efficiency. They used concrete, smaller blocks, and arches, materials that allowed quick, durable construction. They were pragmatic, never wasteful. Yet here, at Baalbek, they supposedly chose to carve and lift blocks 1,000 tons each. Something so extravagant and unnecessary that it borders on absurd. It would be like building a house out of diamonds simply because you could. Why would a practical empire, one that mastered aqueducts, roads, and amphitheaters, attempt something so irrational? Then there's the location. Rome reserved its grandest monuments for its capital or major provincial centers. But Baalbek, though prosperous, was never politically significant. It was a trading hub, not an imperial heart. So why build the largest temple in the entire Roman Empire? Here, in a remote valley of Lebanon, and most damning of all, the silence. The Romans documented everything, every triumph, every structure, every innovation. We know the name of the architect who designed the Colosseum. We have inscriptions describing the cost of aqueducts and bridges, and even detailed notes from Emperor Trajan about how his engineers built the bridge over the Danube. But about Baalbek's foundation, nothing. Not a single line. No inscription mentions the movement or placement of the trilithon stones. No Roman historian ever describes it. It's as if this titanic effort, one of the greatest engineering projects in human history, simply never happened. This silence is not normal. It's impossible. It's like NASA sending astronauts to Mars and forgetting to write about it. And that's why many independent researchers, and even a few brave academics, have started to suggest something radical. The Romans didn't build the foundation. They found it. They arrived at a place already sacred to the local Semitic tribes, a place that, according to the Phoenicians, belonged to their storm god, Baal. They saw an ancient platform, vast, perfect, incomprehensible, and did what any conqueror would do. They built on top of it. They reused it, repurposed it, and made it Roman. That theory explains everything the traditional version cannot. The technological gap, the stylistic mismatch, and the eerie Roman silence. Because the truth might be older. Much older. If not the Romans, then who? The first obvious suspects are the Phoenicians. They lived along this same coast thousands of years before Rome. Master sailors and traders, they built mighty cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos. Their temples, dedicated to Baal and Astarte, once dotted the Levant. Even the name Baalbek comes from Baal, the lord of heaven and thunder. It would make sense. The Phoenicians had the motivation and the reverence to create a temple for their god on this sacred ground. And beneath the Roman ruins, archaeologists have found traces of older construction, blocks and walls dating back to Phoenician times. But there's one problem. The Phoenicians were skilled masons, but nothing in their known architecture comes close to this scale. Their temples used blocks of 10 or 20 tons, not 1,000. Moving such weights would have been as impossible for them as it is for us. Then there's the Egyptian hypothesis. At certain points in the second millennium before Christ, Egypt controlled this region. And if any ancient civilization had the means to move heavy stone, it was Egypt. They transported granite obelisks weighing hundreds of tons, built colossal statues, and mastered construction on a level unmatched for millennia. Could Baalbek have been an Egyptian project, abandoned after their withdrawal from the area? It's tempting, but once again, the details don't fit. The style is wrong. The stones at Baalbek bear no hieroglyphs, no Egyptian iconography. And their precision, the laser-straight edges, the perfectly rectangular cuts, doesn't resemble Egyptian quarrying methods at all. So if not Phoenicians, and not Egyptians, then who? Some researchers go further back, far beyond recorded history. They point out that Baalbek is not the only place where massive stonework defies explanation. Across the planet, scattered like fingerprints, lie the same impossible patterns. The towering stones of Stonehenge, the terraces of Ollantaytambo in Peru, the monolithic temples of Malta, the perfectly interlocking walls of Sacsayhuaman, each one carved and positioned with a precision that modern machines would struggle to match, and each one standing in silence, built by cultures we still call primitive. What if they weren't? What if these sites are the remnants of a global civilization that existed before the dawn of recorded history? Before Egypt, before Sumer, before everything we think we know. A civilization wiped out by a global catastrophe, perhaps 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, leaving behind only scattered survivors and fragments of impossible stone. Baalbek, in that theory, isn't just an isolated mystery. It's a survivor, one of the few outposts of a forgotten world. The idea sounds like myth, yet it answers what conventional archaeology cannot. Because nothing else explains the technological anomaly that Baalbek represents. Nothing explains the gap between the knowledge we think existed and the reality carved into stone. But before we drift too far into speculation, let's return to the evidence. Because the stones themselves, those mute colossal witnesses, still speak if we know how to read them. On the surface of the unfinished monoliths, we find something remarkable: tool marks. Not rough chisel scars, but smooth, parallel grooves running in perfect alignment, as if made by a mechanical cutting device the size of a bus. To a traditional archaeologist, that's nonsense. To an engineer, it's evidence. Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer who spent decades studying ancient machining, argues that these grooves could only have been produced by high-frequency tools, perhaps even by technologies using vibration or ultrasonic resonance. In other words, the ancient builders might have known ways to soften or resonate stone, cutting it as easily as wood. It sounds heretical, but the results speak for themselves. The trilithon blocks are so perfectly shaped that their right angles hold over 20 meters of length without deviation. That kind of precision isn't craftsmanship, it's engineering. And it wasn't unique. Across the ancient world, similar machine-like marks appear on megaliths in Egypt, Peru, and Turkey. Some even share identical circular holes drilled with spiral grooves, holes too smooth, too exact to have been made by primitive tools. Could these be remnants of the same lost technique, a technology older than history itself? It's a possibility that frightens traditional scholars. Because if true, it rewrites everything we know about human progress. It means history is not a steady climb from ignorance to knowledge, but a broken cycle, with peaks of brilliance lost to time and catastrophe. It means we are not the first to stand at the edge of discovery. We are simply the last to remember. When you stand at Baalbek, surrounded by fallen columns and sun-bleached ruins, it's hard not to feel small. The wind whistles through what remains of the Temple of Jupiter. 6 colossal columns that still reach for the sky, the last survivors of an age that refuses to explain itself. And beneath those columns, silent and unmoving, lie the real witnesses, the stones. They are not just old, they are impossible. Each detail, each cut, each angle points to a level of precision and knowledge that shouldn't exist for its time. On some of the megaliths, small circular holes appear in perfect alignment. Not random or uneven like primitive work, but flawless, as if designed for a complex mechanism. Too small for ropes, too shallow for anchors. Their purpose? Unknown. Some have suggested they once held metal rods, part of a forgotten lifting system. Others whisper about something stranger, the use of acoustic levitation, where sound itself counteracts gravity. For centuries, Tibetan and Egyptian legends have spoken of monks and priests who could raise massive stones with trumpets, chants, and resonant vibrations. Science once laughed, until experiments in modern laboratories proved that sound can, indeed, suspend small objects in mid-air. So what if the ancients didn't fight gravity, but sang against it? It sounds like fantasy. And yet, Baalbek stands, solid and silent, daring us to explain it another way. There is another clue, one hidden not in the stone, but in the stars. Across the ancient world, the builders of megaliths seemed obsessed with alignment. From Stonehenge to the pyramids, from Machu Picchu to Göbekli Tepe, all are oriented with stunning accuracy towards solstices, equinoxes, or specific stars. Baalbek is no different. The Roman temple above the platform faces almost perfectly east, but the foundation beneath it, the true mystery, is tilted slightly off that axis. When astronomers simulated the sky of the distant past, something extraordinary appeared. The platform's alignment matches not the sunrise of Roman times, but the rising of Orion's belt, as it appeared around 12,000 years ago. If that's true, the foundation predates Rome, Egypt, and even written history itself. It connects Baalbek to a time when the world was recovering from a cataclysm, a time remembered only in myth as the Flood, the fall of Atlantis, or the end of the Golden Age. This is what makes Baalbek more than an archaeological puzzle. It's a window, a fragment of a forgotten civilization whose mastery of stone, astronomy, and energy defies everything we think we know. But what does that mean for us? For centuries, our history books have told a comfortable story, a story of steady, linear progress. Humanity, we are told, began as primitive hunters, slowly learned to farm, then to build, then to write, then to think. Step by step, from caves to cities, from spears to satellites. It's a flattering tale, because it puts us at the top. We are the smartest, the most advanced, the peak of evolution. But Baalbek doesn't fit that narrative. Neither does Göbekli Tepe, a temple complex in Turkey, built by hunter-gatherers 12,000 years ago, before agriculture even existed. Neither do the underwater ruins near Yonaguni in Japan, or the perfectly carved stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia, or the precision-cut granite at Abu Simbel in Egypt. Each one stands like a scar across the timeline, proof that the story of human civilization isn't a smooth climb, but a heartbeat. Rising, falling, rising again. Perhaps long before us, there were others. Civilizations that reached incredible heights not with steel or electricity, but with knowledge we've long forgotten. Knowledge of the Earth's resonance, the frequency of matter, the hidden forces of nature. Maybe they mastered the very thing we're only beginning to understand: energy, vibration, and consciousness. And then, something happened. A comet impact, a shift of the poles, a flood, a war. Call it whatever you want, but the result was the same. They vanished. And we, their distant descendants, woke up thousands of years later, surrounded by their ruins, believing we were the first to stand beneath the stars. That's what Baalbek represents. Not just a mystery carved in stone, but a mirror held up to our arrogance. It forces us to question everything we think we know about progress. Because if such a civilization could rise, mastering feats that even our modern machines can barely replicate, and then disappear without a trace, what does that say about us? We, too, believe our technology makes us invincible. We, too, build towers that touch the sky and send machines to other planets. But so did they, in their own way, and they are gone. History might not be a ladder after all. It might be a cycle. Standing in Baalbek, among stones that weigh more than 1,000 tons, You can almost feel that cycle, the echo of something vast, patient, and eternal. The same sun that baked these blocks still shines on us. The same wind that swept through this valley now carries our voices. And perhaps one day, the ruins of our cities will puzzle the next world that rises after us. Maybe they'll stand where we stand and ask the same question we ask now. How did they build this? And why did they stop? The truth is, we don't know. Maybe we never will. But Baalbek isn't there to give us answers. It's there to remind us that we are not the beginning of history, and maybe not its end. We are just another chapter. The massive stones beneath the Temple of Jupiter don't care about our theories or our pride. They simply exist, a monument to something we've lost and might never regain. Each cut, each corner, each impossible ton of rock whispers the same silent warning. Others came before you. Others built. Others fell. And if the world stood still once to watch the impossible rise from the earth, it can stand still again to watch it crumble. Baalbek isn't just a ruin. It's a message in stone. A message that says, you were not the first. You will not be the last. So the next time you see those colossal blocks, half buried in sunlit in the valley of Lebanon, remember this. They were not built to impress gods, or kings, or conquerors. They were built to outlast us all.